All right, good morning. Thanks for joining us today as we continue to march through our verses of the week and most powerful scriptures contained in God's Word, the Bible. The verse of the week is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. It says, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." Some interpretations and versions will say, instead of timid, will say the Spirit God gave us does not make us fearful or give us a sense of fear. And what it's teaching us here is that being timid and having fear, those things do not come from God. God's Spirit does not give us those. Instead, what God's Spirit provides us is power, love, and self-discipline. Now, this verse is really popular because it's often shared with people who feel anxious, insecure, or afraid. You know, a lot of people feel anxious because they're just anxious about the unknown, the uncertainty of an outcome, what's going to happen next. And typically, anxiety and being anxious is rooted in control. You want to have control over everything, so when you don't, you feel a little anxious. Insecurity often comes from how you feel about yourself. What's your capabilities? What's your skill sets? Maybe you've been pushed back on or fallen or being tripped up, so you have some insecurity. You know, being afraid and fear. There's natural fear, which is good. I'm walking down a path, I see a snake, I have a bit of fear. It's a natural response to step back for my safety. But the fear we're talking about here is a fear of stepping out into God's plan, into testifying, sharing the gospel with others. Paul's writing this to Timothy, who is a young, up-and-coming pastor, and Paul's mentoring him about don't be afraid. This verse reminds us that fear does not have to define us, because God has already given us everything we need, and that's the power, the love, and self-discipline. Some translations say self-control or a sound mind. Have you ever let fear keep you sidelined? Have you ever been afraid to do something, and so instead of trying it, you just decided to stay back and watch or not participate? And maybe you were insecure. You didn't want to look bad in front of other people. Maybe you felt inadequate, like, well, I'm just not good enough. I don't have what somebody else has, the talent and the resources to achieve that task. Maybe you just lacked overall self-confidence. So instead of stepping out there, what God's calling you to do, you just hold yourself back. You stay stuck right where you're at. Because sometimes staying stuck where you're at is also a sense of comfort. You don't want to step out of your comfort zone. But God never called us to a comfortable life. Jesus even told us we had to take up our cross daily. We had to deny ourselves daily and step out. And those thoughts may have come across your mind in your job. Maybe you had a big task or presentation, you just didn't feel up to it. Or you had an opportunity for a promotion and to manage a large group of people, and you just said, no, I just don't want that responsibility. That's not for me. I can't do it. Maybe it's an interaction with somebody. It's going through a hard time, and you can relate to it. And you really feel compelled to put your hand on their shoulder and just pray over someone. Yet something holds you back in the moment. You don't want to say the wrong words. You don't want to feel uncomfortable. It may be volunteering for something in your church, starting a new ministry, or just the opportunity to stand up and share your testimony of what God's done in your life. You see, Paul wrote these words to Timothy, who's this young leader, and we presume he may have struggled with his own self-confidence, getting a church up and going, taking over the reins. Paul reminds him that fear and being timid is not coming from God. Instead, God's Spirit is filling him with power, love, and self-discipline. Most of us are fear and timid. It's because we have a fear of failure. We all have this fear of failure, and the problem is, you know what the cure for failure is? The antidote for failure? It's actually failing. You know what the fear of rejection is? The antidote to cure being rejected is to actually get rejected. You may say, well, that doesn't make sense, but small doses of what we're afraid of is actually how we build up our immune system. When you go to doctors and you're having an allergy test and they're pricking you with all those little needles and pins, they're exposing your skin to what they think you might be allergic to. And by exposing your body to small doses of what you're afraid of, your immune system starts to build up. And it's the same way with our fear and being timid, with stepping out in our faith. The more we do it, the easier it becomes. But it's often taking off on that first step. Now, the opposite of that is when we think so highly of ourselves. We got that puffed up chest, we're strutting around like a peacock, and I can do anything. And we dive into something without consulting God, without praying about it, and without relying on Him. We don't even know if it's in His will or plan for our life, but we go in full steam and we get ourselves in trouble. At the start of the Civil War, the first battle was the Battle of Bull Run. The Confederate Army from the South had moved north of Richmond, Virginia, was approaching Washington. And they were sitting at a place called Bull Run. And the politicians in Washington got together and the senators were, hey, Confederate Army's like just right across the border. Can you believe they got the nerve to show up there? You know, this ain't going to work. What are we going to do about it? And the senators come up with this great idea. Let's just go show them what we're made of. And without consulting or talking to the president or putting together a battle plan, they just go grab the general and say, hey, grab your troops. We're going to march down there. We're going to show them. So the general grabs his troops and they march to Bull Run. And you know what the politicians do? They call their wives and say, hey, honey, get the kids, make a picnic basket. We're going to follow the army. We're going to go have a picnic and watch this battle. It's going to be awesome. There's this little field. We'll sit up on this hill and we'll just have a picnic. We're going to watch this fight. We're going to drive the Confederate soldiers back. So here's this army marching into battle with all these politicians, wives, and their children with picnic baskets and these horse-drawn carriages. And they set up on this hill. And as the Union Army from the north approaches, Confederate Army puts up a fight. And they get pushed back. And they go, wow, that's like hitting a stone wall. The Confederates had a general called General Jackson who'd earned the nickname Stonewall Jackson through this battle. So they keep attacking and they keep suffering heavy losses to the point now the Confederate Army does what? They charge them. They go on the enemy went on the offensive. And it drives them all the way back and they start in this massive panicked retreat. And they're running through the senators and their wives and these screaming kids. They're trying to throw their kids and their lunch into the wagon. It's total chaos and they retreat in defeat. And sometimes we catch ourselves realizing, I want to go do this and I can do this on my own, and the enemy punches back. And anytime the enemy punches back, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means you're probably doing something right for God's kingdom. He just doesn't want you to get off the ground with it. The enemy punched back. What do? They had to retreat. They had to replan. Abraham Lincoln puts a new general in place. They got more troops, they got more weapons, they got all the stuff. They just weren't prepared. And our lives are like that too. Whenever we face a challenge in life, we need to get aligned with God's will. And we need to prepare ourselves through prayer and proper planning to fulfill what God's calling us to do. God's gift of power through His Spirit means we're not powerless against our daily challenges. The love He gives us means our courage is actually rooted in caring for others. It's not in pride or aggression within ourselves. And the self-discipline talked about here from God's Spirit means we can grow into steady, faithful people who make wise choices. There's a lady you may have heard of. Her name's Joni Eareckson Tada. Love that last name, Tada. At age 17, she come from an athletic family. Both her mom and her dad were college athletes, and they were outdoors people, and she rode horseback, and she played tennis and golf, and was a big swimmer. And at age 17, in 1969, she's diving into the Chesapeake Bay near their home. And she's diving off some rocks. And she hits an underwater object and becomes totally paralyzed from the neck down. She's now a quadriplegic. At age 17, this beautiful young girl who's so athletic is confined to a wheelchair and has no movement from the neck down. And in her testimony and in her book, she says, I went through an extreme period of stress. What was my life going to be like? I was active. I always was outdoors. I always was doing something. And now I'm confined to a wheelchair. And I'm 17 years old. My life's over. And she admits that stress, she didn't deal with it. Instead, she let that stress manifest itself into anxiety. And she let the anxiety build within her. And she became very anxious. And she says, at the point I knew it just wasn't stress, I let it become anxiety. I should have went to my doctor at that point. I should have got the medical treatment and counseling I needed as soon as I thought I've got anxiety. But she said, I thought I could do it on my own. And what happened? That anxiety continued to grow, and it became the next step, depression. And she fell into a big depression. Now she was depressed. Her life was over. She's not going to get married. She's not going to have kids. She can't do this. She can't do that. And she was depressed. She was confined to her wheelchair, stuck in the house. And she says, at the point I realized I was totally depressed, I should have got counseling. I should have sounded the alarm. I should have got some medication to help me. I should have done something to get back right. But I didn't. And she became suicidal. Life was over and she had no will to live. And she started having suicidal thoughts. Well, there's no need for me to continue. There's no need to go on. But she come from a faith-based family, and she found this verse in 2 Timothy. And she said, Spirit that God gave me did not make me timid, and I should not be fearful. Instead, I have access to power, to love, and self-discipline. What am I going to do with my life? And she gave it to God and said, what's God's plan? Because she realized even through a tragedy, God had a plan and was mapping something out, and she was just going to have to take her self-pride in the life that she thought she was going to have. How do I use the life God's given me for the benefit of His kingdom? Joni is now in her late 70s. She's been an evangelist for years and has shared her testimony across the globe. She has written 48 books about overcoming challenges and disabilities and God's plan for your life. 48 books. A lot of us haven't even read 48 books. She's also a renowned artist. You're like, well, wait a minute, she's paralyzed neck down. How is she a world-renowned artist? She paints with a brush in her mouth and painstakingly paints beautiful pictures just with a brush in her mouth. She had a talk show for years called Joni and Friends, you may have seen. And she would share her testimony in her wheelchair. Guests would come in and they would talk about their challenges and how to overcome, and how when you thought you were down and out, how God was pointing you in a direction to release that fear and anxiety and to step into His power and love and discipline, because there was a plan. She became an advocate. She went to Washington, D.C., and she became one of the first leading advocates for disability rights. Those little blue cards and signs and handicap parkings and all the requirements for handicap access, Joni led the charge. She got 52 awards, medals, nominations through Washington for leading committees and chairs for developing rights for people who had paralyzed and disabilities to get them back in the workforce. And she led by example. But it wasn't easy. She spoke at all these conferences, and she wrote a story that I printed out and read. She's at this conference speaking. It's a women's conference. And they're during a break, and they're in the restroom, and her assistant is touching up her lipstick and her hair because she's one of the main speakers. And there are several other women in there powdering their noses. And one of them says, "Joni, you always look so together, so happy in your wheelchair. I wish I had your joy. How do you do it?" one of them asked. "How are you always so well presented, well put together every single day?" And Joni looked at her and said, "I don't do it. May I tell you honestly how I woke up this morning?" And the restroom went quiet. And Joni said, "This is an average day. After my husband Ken leaves at 6 a.m., I am alone until I hear the front door open at 7 a.m. That's when my friend, my assistant, arrives to get me up out of bed. And while she makes coffee, I pray, Lord, my friend will soon give me a bath. She will dress me. She will sit me up in my chair, brush my hair and teeth, and prepare me and take me out the door for the day." And Joni said, "I just don't have the strength to do this routine anymore. I got no energy left. I don't want to face it. I don't have a smile to take into the day." And then she pauses and says, "But you do, God. May I have yours? God, I need you desperately." "So what happens when your friend comes in the bedroom?" one of them said. "I turn my head toward her, and I give her a big old smile from God, and I kind of nod towards my legs. And I say, 'Hey, this smile, it's not mine, it's God's.' She points to her legs. 'Whatever joy you see today was hard won this morning.' And she said, 'I learned the weaker we are, the more we need to lean into God. And the more we lean on God, the stronger we find Him to be.'" And she always quoted this verse, that whatever challenge there is in life, whatever God's plan is, we're not to be timid. We're not to be afraid, but we're also not to just necessarily have to depend on our own strength and willpower, because God's Holy Spirit is what's given us the power, the love, and self-discipline to face every challenge that we have. Fear's natural. It's not a sin to be afraid. But the verse reminds us as Christians to stop dwelling in fear and letting it hold us back from what God's actually calling us to do. So what can this verse mean for you today? When fear tells you that you're not enough, when anxiety says you can't do it or be the person you want to be anymore, remember, you don't have to face life on your own, because God's offering His courage. He's offering His love and His strength to anyone willing to receive it. The problem is our spiritual enemy, the devil, is a liar. Jesus even told us that in John 10:10. He says, "The thief comes only to steal, to kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." You see, the enemy will whisper in our ears, "You're not good enough. You can't accomplish that. That dream's beyond your reach. You were never made to lead. You weren't meant to have those things. You weren't meant, don't stand up and speak. People are going to laugh at you." The enemy will even put You heard the phrase wolves in sheep clothing? Will even use people and words against you. And you'll hear these words, and then when you say, see, they don't think you're capable. They don't think you're good enough. You'll share a dream or go with somebody, and you'll say, oh, that's too hard, that's impossible. That's the spiritual enemy whispering, trying to get you to stop. Because anytime you're on a mission from God, the enemy's trying to stop you before you get going. Because he knows once you get going and God's power kicks in, you're going to become unstoppable. So be aware. Be wary of the wolves in sheep clothing. Be wary of the little lies and ask yourself, spirit that God gives me does not make me timid, does not speak fear, does not speak anxiety. So if it's not coming from him, who's it coming from? It's coming from your enemy. And we have to turn to our God and say, I rely on your power, your love, and your self-discipline. I saw a quote this week. I really liked it. It said, the enemy likes to hide wolves in sheep's clothing, but that's okay. Because our God likes to hide lions inside of lambs. You have a lion inside of you. To the outside world, you may look like a lamb as a child of God, but you have a lion ready to roar. So let that Holy Spirit inside of you roar like a lion today. And if you feel a little uncertain or unsure, think about this verse and just take one step today towards your goal. One step toward whatever is making you fearful or timid or anxious. Just take one step and see what happens. Opportunity comes to pray for somebody. Take one step. Pray for them. Opportunity comes to share a testimony. One more step. Just take one step every day. And always remember and lean on today's verse in 2 Timothy 1:7, for the Spirit of God, the Spirit God gave us, does not make us timid, but it gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Have a blessed week. Next time we join up, we'll be into August. So have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.